Die neue Folge von Nullpunkt ist entstanden als Kooperation, als Event zusammen mit Books of Others. Das ist eine Eventreihe im Hinterraum einer Bar in Neukölln. Deswegen haben wir logischerweise auf Englisch gesprochen, obwohl Asal Dardan, meine Gesprächspartnerin, eine deutschsprachige Autorin ist. Wir sprechen zentral über einen Essay, den Asal veröffentlicht hat in einem Essayband, der gerade erst erschienen ist. Das heißt Gegenwehr im Jetzt. Und es geht ganz konkret in diesem Band, so wie in dem Essay, um Fragen von Solidarität, um Fragen von Erinnerung, Erinnerungskultur in Deutschland nach dem 7. Oktober und heute. Wir sind ein 100% unabhängiger Interview-Podcast und damit wir unabhängig bleiben können, brauchen wir eure Unterstützung. Wir haben jetzt schon einige Patreon-Abonnentinnen, aber wir brauchen einige mehr, damit wir weitermachen können. Den Link für diese Patreon-Unterstützung findet ihr hier in der Description und wir freuen uns natürlich auch, wenn ihr die Folge weiterverbreitet, teilt, liked und so weiter, uns folgt auf den entsprechenden Plattformen. Ich wünsche euch viel Spaß mit dem Gespräch mit Asal. From my part, thank you so much to Omar, Silvia, Bani and everyone else who's involved in this event and this event series. It's an incredible honor for me to be part of this, and not only because I've seen the event series from afar and I really admire the stuff that you're doing, but also and especially because I love your work.
Oh, thank you.
And I really think there are a few literary / journalistic voices in this country that have been so sort of like acutely analyzing the moment, and I'm happy to speak with you about these issues. We said we're doing this in English.
Yeah.
Just for the sake of everyone understanding, we are believing that that will open the room a bit more. But
yeah, is there anyone who doesn't understand English? No. Okay. So, but there are people who wouldn't understand German, I think. Yeah. Okay.
so we
Now you wanted to make me blush as well. with
No,
your
no, no.
introduction. It's
No,
just like-
seriously, I think your work is really important and crucial, and it really interfaces with many of the questions I'm dealing with as well. So I
Yeah.
think this actually makes sense. But we wanted to start by giving you the possibility to read from one of your recent essays,
Yeah,
right?
you just said that. I thought we'd first speak a bit, maybe,
Okay.
because it's also in German, so it
Okay.
doesn't make sense, maybe, if that's okay. It's also, in the meantime, it's been published. It just published last week. So it came out. It's part of a collective work, which maybe I should say what it is.
Please.
About after the European elections, and in which the right really, got a lot of votes. Oliver Vogel, who's the publisher of Fischer Verlag, approached me and Lena Gorelik, who's also a writer here in Germany. She writes novels, also essays, political essays, approached us and said, what now? Like, are we in the middle? Can we even stop it? Yeah. And we decided to invite a historian, his name is Dietmar Süß, from our different perspectives. Lena is Jewish, I don't know, sort of German now, I guess, and but my parents fled from Iran, but also under very different circumstances than other people fled. I might talk about that a bit later. And Dietmar is a historian who, of course, comes from a kind of Nazi background, but also deals with, German history in his work. And so we had this conversation, and then at some point we felt, who's going to read all this? Blah, blah, blah. Maybe we should also write essays, each one from our backgrounds and our views, and then we also brought in a moderator, Shelley Kupferberg, who kind of gave our conversation a bit of a form and a direction with her questions, and she also used parts that we had already recorded beforehand. And so now, much later, we actually wanted to just do this in 3 months, but then it took over a year. Now it's out, and at some point, I know that the question we were asked was, where is Europe at, and is fascism coming again? But for me, it was clear I would have to write an essay on how the German discourse has went, or the directions the German course, is gone October 7th. For me, that's part of it. And so that's why my essay deals with that. Yeah.
You know, the subtitle is something on democracy, memory, and solidarity, a conversation about memory, solidarity, and democracy.
Yeah. Well, it's what publishers, they always want a subtitle, you know.
I couldn't think of,
It was long discussions about it, you know.
It's pretty broad terms, though. When I read your essay, it feels like you have a much more sort of directed lens. And like one thing that really stood out to me, like kind of immediately, was this word, trotzdem. Everybody coming to the bilingual aspect of the evening. You would translate this to, I assume, nevertheless, or despite, or so kind of despite the policing of discourse, despite the disappointment and the sort of, I'm paraphrasing obviously, but this feeling of kind of being let down, you still go on, you still attempt dialogue, you still attempt to speak, right? And like that's kind of the general vibe, I would say, broadly, of the essay.
I mean, in my essays, I usually tend to be a bit more optimistic than I really am, because of course I'm sharing them with others, and so of course I guess it's not only, I think the content of a text or any art piece is not the only political aspect of it. It's also how, you know, the context in which it is created is also political, you know. So I want to connect with people, so of course I try to offer something that people can connect with. It's very easy to be sort of, oh, everything's kaput and broken and nothing's worth fighting for anymore. Right. So I do have a great sense of failure personally, like my own failure, but also more broadly speaking, us as German people in the public space, intellectuals, artists, activists, maybe less so. I feel they're still people we can count on. And there are usually, that's why in Traumaland I write a lot about activists, because I feel they are what fuel my writing, you know, because writing is such a solitary act and it's also so futile. You kind of think, I could write the sentence, but is it going to save anyone or anything?
Can I just ask, who did you have in mind when you wrote this essay as a target audience, so to speak? Like, who did you write this for?
The essay in this book?
Right.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I wrote it a little bit directed at the people I mention in the book, which very specifically are a lot of my colleagues in the German literary scene. I kind of wanted to talk to them because I feel only talking via Instagram stories is not very, you know.
Gets tiring.
Yeah, it gets a bit tiring. And it's also like, it lacks depth. I'm not very good at it as well. I take more time.
Sure.
I have more complicated words. I don't know. That's probably also why I don't make as much money with my writing than other people do. I don't have like a slogan, a provocative, you know, because I feel one of the aspects that are really important to me, which I also try to highlight in this essay, is how we do fail and we are incomplete and we are, how you say in English, fehlbar. You know,
fallible.
Yeah, fallible. We have, you know, we have flaws. We're not, and so I mean this in. So I'm always a bit appalled by heroic figures. Like I always think like everyone's going to fall off those pedestals, and the same I feel is wrong when people villainize others. So I wanted to write a text that is not easily fed into some sort of antagonistic, you know, framework.
Yeah.
But I still wanted it to be very clear on the side of life and solidarity, and not on the side of treating human life as dispensable and human beings as objects of discourse.
Right. You know, since you mentioned now characters in the essay
Yeah.
as sort of maybe also the people you speak to some extent. And the first ones that kind of jump into mind are Vivian Silver and Hamam Alon,
Yeah.
which are, just for context, this essay also deals with the question of like how to write or how to kind of do culture after October 7th. And these are two people, Vivian Silver, maybe you can say more about them, but like my actual question is,
Yeah.
and this really resonated with me because I'm asking myself this question all the time. You write about people that you kind of self-critically later observe that they're somehow acceptable victims in the German discourse. And how do you kind of deal with this tension that you do want to be heard, obviously in Germany, you do want to maybe even influence things within the confines of that discourse. But then again, there's always that kind of danger to sort of, appease to its inherent racism or its inherent other kind of confines. Like, how do you? I was wondering, because that's something I'm dealing with. How do you kind of deal with that tension?
Yeah, maybe before I talk about this essay specifically, I think I have to say something about my background. I was born in Iran. Right during the revolution in December 78, and it was a really bloody day, the day I was born. My mother is from a religious minority, a Syrian, so we're Christians, but my father worked for SAVAK, which is the violent secret service of the Shah. So my parents had to flee after the revolution. They kind of had the same enemy as many other people who fled, but not out of the same reason. My father had a very good life under the Shah. He had a villa, he had a car, swimming pool. I would have probably been one of those girls that studied in America. You know, I would have had a great life in Iran. And so that sort of gave me already this feeling of years later as a grown-up. I mean, when you come to Germany, everybody loves the Shah and, Shah Banu and whatever. They were always on the magazine, on the Bunte, visiting her in her Parisian exile. So I never realized that they were actually bad people or, stood for something bad until much later when I actually in school learned about the killing of Benno Ohnesorg. So German history actually, led me to my own history and to my own family history, and only because I was wondering, like, why would people protest when our lovely Shah is in Berlin? Like, just that doesn't make sense.
Like, Benno Ohnesorg, one of the famously killed when the Shah visited in Berlin, and like part of the student movement.
Yeah, he was part of the student movement. He was shot by a policeman, and that, in a way, was how the student movement radicalized. And it happened during the Shah's visit in Berlin. And so that was baffling to me that people would protest against the Shah, because I hadn't heard about any criticism of the Shah. So I learned very early on that maybe what you grow up with is not really what other people's reality is. And then in the next step, I learned that I owe something to other people who come from the same country, because the violence that they encountered in the country I was born in doesn't kind of stop only because we live in a different country. We bring that history, that legacy of that violence with us here. And it's a very painful thing, because it's about my, parents, or not so much my mother, but my father and his guilt and what he did and how much he was part of it, how much he knew, and complicity and all that. So everything that Germany feels like it's only their, Mustergültige story of how to, was also my personal story. And when I started writing about the Holocaust and everything, I knew that I was also drawn to it because of my own history and my own story. So, and then, of course, there's the layer when you come to Germany as an Iranian, especially a Christian Iranian, you're so much better than the Muslims and so much more loved than the Turks. And to always encounter this, oh my God, you're the cultivated foreigners, you know. Oh, you're not like them. You kind of have to learn not to go with that, not to feel flattered, not to say, yeah, well, I'm not like them, but to understand what you're trying to be made part of. So, having said that, that all I think is an experience that undergirds this essay as well.
Yeah.
Like to understand that being the good one is not always a compliment.
It sounds like you had acquiesced, or you got accustomed to being kind of othered in the or sort of put in a box within the German discourse way before October 7th.
Yeah, I was the good one from the Orient, you know, like.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So now you mentioned Vivian Silver and Haman Alo. They were, and this is something I've noticed before. It is so weird how we often hear of very brave people only once they're dead, and it is so shattering that happens. And so I only heard of both of them. Haman Alo, actually, I saw in an interview on Democracy Now!, I think just days before he was killed.
I remember that interview, yeah.
Yeah, he had a very strong interview, strong interview on Democracy Now!, and then just a few days later on Democracy Now! They said he was killed because he refused to leave his patients. Before he was a doctor at Al-Shifa in Gaza, and he was killed there. And Vivian Silver was one of the Jewish victims in Kibbutz Be'eri for several days, I think 2 or 3 weeks. Her son still thought that she had survived, and she was among the people kidnapped by Hamas, but later on they found her body in the kibbutz. And so I was asked by a different publisher to write a text. I think it was December 23, so really just in the midst of all of it. And I was really annoyed about what Germany did, or especially the Böll Foundation did to Masha Gessen. And so I decided to write about that.
Maybe we just for the sake of.
Sorry, I talk so much.
No. Just for the sake of that everyone is on the same page. Masha Gessen, who I think calls themselves M Gessen at this point, but
M Gessen.
No, but like just was receiving
non-binary intellectual.
Exactly. Yeah. Famous intellectual who regularly writes for the New Yorker was receiving the Hannah Arendt Prize, and that came shortly after she had written an essay on Germany in which she criticized the instrumentalization of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism to cancel artists, academics, and so on and so forth. And then, almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, there was a campaign, I would say, by the Deutsche Israelische Gesellschaft, which at this point feels like a blueprint kind of phenomenon that happens time and again. And the prize was given to her, but without participation of the Böll Foundation. They sort of publicly distanced themselves from this prize ceremony, and that's what you just do.
Yeah, exactly. And I just thought, I mean, it's good to know your history, because Heinrich Böll, the namesake of that foundation, had written an essay about Ulrike Meinhof in the Spiegel, after which he was so vilified by Springer, by the Welt and Bild press, that he actually left Germany for a while. There was a police search in his house, and he was so attacked, and he was called sort of like the forethinker of terrorism. Because he did the simple thing of saying Ulrike Meinhof and the other people who are now named as members of the RAF, no matter what, they are humans, and we cannot touch their human dignity either. A very simple thing. But he was, of course, instantly kind of put in one with whatever Ulrike Meinhof wrote, thought, did, so that there was no value to her dignity, or to her, to her presumed innocence as well, because this was before she was even on trial. And also, suddenly, Heinrich Böll, one of the most revered and also literary Nobel Prize, I don't know if he had the Nobel Prize at the time. I think not. I think he got it later, after this whole debacle. But anyway, so, and I thought how absurd that the names, that this foundation now that is comes out of his experience, his literary work, and comes out of all that, and then they suddenly do the same to M. Gessen. Again, it's grotesque.
Oh, the irony.
Yeah,
Also,
it's not even ironic. It's deeply violent and
of course,
stupid, you know. And I was so annoyed with the Heinrich Böll Foundation, because they were also so provincial in everything they said around the whole thing. You know, it was all about how they felt as Germans, you know. And so I felt I wanted to write about that, and I wanted to remind everyone of what Heinrich Böll wrote, and why does this foundation now suddenly feel they can distance themselves from what Heinrich Böll stood for. But I also am a soft writer. I mean, now I don't sound like it, but I'm a soft writer. So I started my essay. I started my essay by writing about these two victims who died in the early stages, where we were still capable of hearing names and remembering voices and faces. I mean, much later it was just numbers coming out of Gaza, right? I mean, and then the occasional child but in a way it was just production of bodies, you know. So, yeah.
Yes, so.
But exactly, as you said, I then, when I wrote this essay, I felt like, you know, Vivian Silver and Haman Allo are exactly that what Mohammed El-Kurd says. They're perfect victims. There's nothing you can, I mean, they fought so much for the good and the peace, and it's so easy to mourn them.
Well, it's interesting that you are kind of, so Mohammed El-Kurd's perfect victims, maybe let's establish for a minute what that actually, like, he wrote a book titled Perfect Victims and the Politics of Appeal, but like I'll let you explain that thesis if you want.
Yeah, I mean, I should have brought it with me, actually. That's. You have it in English here. That's amazing. Yeah, because like here, just to get because now finally it's been translated into German by a very small press. I heard that another publisher wanted. Shout out to them, because for ages no one wanted to touch it. In Germany, because also Mohammed El-Kurd actually was one of the first, before October 7th, who had been disinvited by the Goethe Institute in Hamburg.
Right, yeah. I cancelled my participation in
that
did?
Event.
Yeah. Alongside with many other people who...
How was that at the time?
You know, it's interesting when suddenly the question, when the situation turns, you know. It felt necessary because, you know, sometimes after the genocide and I think the kind of normalization of violence in talking about the genocide in Germany, we kind of forget that a lot of these patterns aren't exactly new, right? And that they sort of started way before. And so I think I had written an article about the firing of a young Palestinian German journalist who's also happens to be a friend of ours, Emil Hassan.
Exactly.
Who in 2021, I believe, and that was just a few months before then Mostre Hilal and Sintijan Barataraja had invited Mohammed El-Kurd onto the Goethe Institute event, and they, as far as I understood, communicated to the both of them that they cannot invite him for whatever reason. I think it wasn't a good reason, but it just felt like I cannot, with any sort of sense of goodwill, participate in such an event. If I'm publicly writing about the really racist and completely unfounded discrimination of colleagues and journalists like Nemi in the public sphere, like it would have felt like very hypocritical, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have to admit that because of Moshtari, Hilal and Sintujan Varataraja's invitation of Mohammed El-Kurd and this whole spectacle of disinviting him, that was actually how I heard of him first.
Yeah.
So, what do you call that? The Streisand effect or something, right?
Right,
or, yeah.
of course, yeah. At this point, we all wish to be cancelled just for more people to read our things.
But he, of course, had, I mean, because the publisher didn't want English quotes, so I translated them myself. But for example, I quote him saying about Palestinians and the perfect victims they have to be. Now I quote him: "We are women and children always, and if we are men, then we are frail and elderly, reiterating our nonviolence, gesturing at each other's amputated limbs. We are not human automatically by virtue of being human. We are humanized by virtue of our proximity to innocence." And I felt, okay, that's what I did with Vivian Silver and Hamanalo. I didn't do it. I did it instinctively, maybe because I know, because I am a German, you know, like I grew up here, I went to school here, I'm very much, I have a German in my mind, you know, somehow, unfortunately. And so maybe but at the time, I didn't realize I was doing it. I was trying to sell these people as good,
of course,
and especially Haman Alo, you know.
Well, both of them
as the Palestinian.
Yes, both of them are in fact good people, right? But it seems to me the sort of brilliance of this argument is like, why do we have to? It seems to me, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like, please disagree if you do, but why do we have to humanize and idealize and sort of like, why do we have to kind of carve out the virtuosity, the virtueful things in people in order to, you know, remember their death or their suffering or their expulsion? Like, why is that even? I think that's a very interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, you know, when I wrote my dissertation, not my dissertation, I don't have a PhD, I have kids.
Its own kind of PhD.
No, my diploma, I wrote my diploma on the memory of the Holocaust in film. And so I wrote about films that play in the time after, you know. I wasn't interested in how is the Holocaust depicted, but how is the time after depicted. And one of the filmmakers who's now had some resurrection sort of in the, was Thomas Brasch. And he made a film with Tony Curtis, actually, called Der Passagier, which is a great film. And he said he wanted to make a film about a real Jewish asshole to trigger the Germans. Because, and it was also something that was what the 60s film, The Pawnbroker, which is a film about a Holocaust survivor, a Jew who's a pawnbroker, who's really ill-tempered, who's tight, who's mean, was criticized for being an anti-Semitic film. And the filmmaker said, but why does he have to be nice? He's a Holocaust survivor. Like, sort of like you kind of need a good victim anyway. You have to be a good person to show that you deserve not being killed or what. It's like weird. So you don't even have to go to Gaza to kind of attack this sort of German neurosis of people having to be picture perfect victims, or you don't get any sympathy,
right.
You know?
Yeah.
But the lesson from Holocaust should have been no one deserves to be killed,
of course,
right?
Yeah.
I mean, like, I feel like I'm saying the most banal things, and that is how
course,
it's been, right, in Germany for even before October 7th.
Absolutely, yes.
It's been, it's for many years. I mean, since member maybe, or I don't know, like it's been like you have to say the most obvious things, and you kind of check yourself and say, isn't this actually a commonly agreed knowledge?
The case where I found this thesis to be very sort of plastic personally was Shirin Abu Akleh, you know, the Palestinian journalist that was killed in Jenin back then by the Israeli military. And I remember that the reporting often went in the direction of saying, Shirin, she was such a generous person.
Yeah.
Shirin, she was such a understanding, Western looking. Also, she had an American passport.
Yeah.
She was Palestinian, but she was also American. Or, I mean, all sorts of attributes, which I think often, I don't blame anyone who says such things. I think they come out of kind of a good sort of intention, but like, I think the kind of underlying thing is also, oh, and she was a woman, of course. It's like, would we not be kind of giving the same level of respect to a man in his 40s who's maybe not generous and not beautiful and not as famous, who was killed in as a journalist? I mean, this is the kind of questions that I feel like are really on the table with this book and with your essay as well.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's also, it might all be true. I mean, there are really lovely people being killed, but their loveliness is not the reason why they shouldn't be killed,
right.
You know? And it's... The thing is, I got really shocked, and that's why I had to write this essay when there was this discussion last year, was it? When suddenly there were these pictures out of Gaza of malnourished, like really just like skin and bones toddlers.
Right.
Remember? And
yes.
There was this one image, very famous, of the boy being held by his mother, and he doesn't even have a nappy. He has a plastic bag, and you just see his spine, and it's just like a horrific image, and you see the sadness in the mother's eye. And then Germany discusses whether this is a healthy child or whether he has a precondition. And you kind of think, so what? Even if he had a precondition, you can see he's malnourished. And are we back to saying that people with precondition that are disabled or something are not worth saving?
Just to make this really explicit, like the articles were questioning whether the child was actually dying from hunger, or whether the hunger that was so obvious in the picture was maybe caused by a previous illness that could then not be attributed to the forced starvation campaign that Israel inflicted on Gaza.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And the thing is, of course, that the most vulnerable, like people with elderly people or babies, and they're the first ones to die. So his vulnerability, even if he had a precondition, meant that he was one of the most vulnerable who had to be saved first, and not like to say, well, he would have died anyway or something. I mean, that was so shocking to me that I felt like, okay, you don't cry about our fathers, you don't cry about our uncles, then it's suddenly, and now we're at babies. And then I suddenly felt like, okay, so now even babies are not perfect enough for us.
So didn't Anne Frank die of tuberculosis in the end?
Anne Frank died of tuberculosis, of course. Yeah.
I'm just this, of course.
Or at least they say it. They also wrote things. Yeah.
What I'm saying is does it really matter, right? I mean, at the end of the day.
I mean, it's obvious that the conditions in which these people live have an effect on their well-being.
Then again, even if let's assume that the image, this baby in this specific image that was discussed, had a previous illness, we all know that hunger exacerbates illness, right?
Yes, exactly.
How can we even isolate these things?
Well, the thing is also that a lot of people then said in defense, which is perverse already, that probably it's because of the mother's malnourishment during the pregnancy that the baby was disabled. So, and I just thought, okay, we're not seeing the humans at all anymore, at least not in this discourse. And then before that already, I was kind of very upset about, I'm not member of the PEN Berlin for very I'm not good with German egos, so I didn't want to be a part of this. I think PEN International is great and whatever. So
PEN Berlin is the Writers Association, right? In Berlin.
That's very new as well. That was founded in the last few years in a sort of protest from the other PEN Germany, and they kind of split ways, and it was a very German spectacle. So PEN International and also PEN Germany and many other PENs released a statement saying that they are worried and devastated because there are so many journalists and writers and colleagues and artists being killed in Palestine. And they urge, they want a ceasefire. I think that was sort of the wording. I mean, and then a few members, I think 24 or something, members of the PEN Berlin distanced themselves from this statement by naming two Palestinians that they don't, two murdered Palestinians that they don't view their colleagues. One of them was Refat Alaria, a poet who was killed with family members in a private home by a bomb. And the other one was Mustafa al-Sawaf, a journalist who also worked for Hamas outlets. And so they distanced themselves from them and named them and said, we don't consider these people our colleagues. And I thought, okay, you didn't just not say anything. You actually named dead people and said they're not your colleagues. And I felt that was, and that out of some sort of understanding of German responsibility that I myself feel a lot. I mean, I've been writing about the Holocaust and about memory culture for over 20 years. It's not like I don't feel it's part of my responsibility to talk about it. So that was devastating to me. And I kept on thinking, okay, those are not your colleagues, but somehow you are my colleagues? What? So in which relation? Because I sit on the same stages with these people. I don't sit with them, but we share the same outlets, the same platforms.
Did they give any sort of official explanation as to why they don't consider them as colleagues, besides the fact that one of them wrote for a Hamas-adjacent outlet?
Well, one of them was a Hamas journalist. That was enough for them. And the other one, Refat Alaria, who's very famous and prominent, he had written, I think, on October 7th or after, what also Masha Gessen wrote. He had compared it to the Warsaw Ghetto uprising.
Right.
Which I wouldn't say. I don't think it's the right analogy. Now I'm distancing myself from a killed person. I mean, it's so stupid. But, I mean, who are we? If we talk about universalizing Holocaust memory, then do we really mean that someone who's born in the West Bank or someone who has family members killed in Gaza needs to have the same sort of speaking standards and loyalties towards things than we do? I mean, that's absurd.
Absolutely.
The lesson should rather be that no one should be killed, So, that all very upset me, and I have been more of the quieter people. I haven't been shouting a lot about Gaza and genocide, and I have been and I've been thinking a lot about it. Shouldn't you have posted more? Shouldn't you have said more? But I did every time. I write in essays. I write long form. I don't want to have antagonistic fights with people. I often ask myself, am I naive? Am I weak? Am I too comfortable? I don't know. Sometimes I feel really like I feel a bit cowardly sometimes,
Really?
Yeah, I do sometimes. But then I think, fuck it, I do more than a lot of other people, and it's not really about me. It's not like it's not about me or what I feel, or it's not even about the stupid German discourse. It's about at least standing up for something you really believe in and not letting it happen without witnessing it. And I think that's why Mohammed El-Kurd wrote this, or also in the case of Iran. I mean, I live here. What do I know about the Iranian people, But if someone invites me, I try to talk about it, but I always try to show the limitations I have in talking about Iran. And so, I write about this knowing all the limitations I have.
Right. I guess, I don't know if this answers your question, but I often feel that how could anything be adequate to do or to post or to say? And I'm not saying this as kind of an excuse for being silent, but I think there's a difference between being silent in order to not lose your job, or be as an opportune decision, or to be faced with these questions like, what can you say in the face of such a monstrosity, right? I mean, there is never going to be an adequate amount of tweets that you could have written, or an adequate amount of books that you could have produced in this time in order to really make a change. I think that's just an impossibility.
And I think the performativity of it also sometimes absolves you. You kind of feel like, okay, I posted that, But like last week I was at the Berliner Ensemble because Alena Jabarin, who's a Palestinian German journalist, she wrote a sort of autobiographical account of her time in Palestine. She was in the West Bank and in Ramallah and in 2019, I think. And she wrote a lovely book about it. She's a very good. She really knows to capture life and people, and she has a great presence. And so I went to see her performance. It's not only a reading from her book. She performs, and there's a Palestinian musician with her who's in this performance, and really different than just reading her book. And she said, you know what, a lot of people I see posting about Palestine online, I hope I'm allowed to quote her now, but a lot of people that post a lot, they don't show up to my performance, and there are finally 2 Palestinians on a big German stage. Where are these people? It doesn't happen that often that 2 Palestinians get such a big stage and they just get to do what they want to do. And it's a lovely show. It's still on for 3 nights, I think. So if you have time, go and see it. And so, I guess sometimes it's worth more writing to someone, talking to someone, going to an event than posting something.
What I hear from what you said now throughout this conversation again and again is this question, kind of like, how can it be that people are drawing such strange or oxymoronic or conflicting lessons from their own history of genocide, the Holocaust? How can it be that we don't have a universal kind of take afterwards? And I'm kind of wondering, how do you think about memory or memory culture? Like, how should that look like if it were done better?
Well, I haven't, because I'm not a theoretical thinker, I'm not an intellectual, I guess.
Oh, you are an intellectual, yes.
Well, not in that way that I have big theories to present, and maybe that's even my answer to you. I think everything has to come from life, from lived, from the active, from the human. We are not, I once heard Omri Böhm say in a podcast, only because universalism has never worked doesn't mean we can't do it. And I kind of like, well, you're not factoring in the humans, like we maybe we're not made for it, maybe we're just, I am sort of an idealist, but I do think really I'm more of I love Edouard Glissant and his sort of ideas of chaos and creolization, and there will not be a whole. There will not be a unity of that kind. we will be fragmented and we will be messy and chaotic, and to let everything live. Maybe even in antagonistic moments, but to let it live, to let it thrive, to let it be chaotic. That's my idea of it.
Okay.
And so my idea is also in terms of memory culture, if you turn it into something static, if you turn it into an ideology, if you turn it into an idea that is divorced from human life, if it serves people, then I don't see its worth anymore. I can give you an example which I wrote about in Traumaland.
Yeah.
In Schöneberg there is I don't know, it's not anymore, but this was before the Stolpersteine. I don't know if you all know them, these stones that are let in the... So this is something that was built, I think, in the late 80s, early 90s. It's quite a few years old now. It's plaques that are a bit over eyesight on lamp poles. And on one side there's a very graphic image, like a dog, like it's almost like from children's books, like a dog or a swimming trunk or a bench. And on the other side is the Nazi order. For example, from this date on, Jews are not allowed to have pets. Or from this date on, Jews are not allowed to go to bathhouses. And so it's the Nazi language on one side and then an illustration on the other. And it was actually on the way to my kids' school. So at some point my kids kind of saw the cat, the dog, whatever, and kind of said, Mom, what is this? And then it was an opportunity for me to tell my kids, you know, once there used to live people here in these houses, and then other people decided they weren't the right kind of people. And I explained sort of like on a child's level what happened in these streets. And they thought, wow, I can't believe they lived here and that happened. And what is a Jew, you know? And then I met a Jewish father, and he said, you know what, I fucking hate that thing. Because every time I pass it with my kid kind of goes, why do we Jews not, why are we allowed to have pets? And he always had to tell his kid, no, this is not now, you know? And I kind of realized, okay, this is like a very German thing. Like, they feel really good about this, but all the Jews feel horrible about it, you know? It's like, and that's what I mean. Like,
it's a nice illustration.
Yeah, it's like well-intentioned, but who is it made for?
Right.
I can understand it's really traumatizing and triggering to read Nazi language like that on your walk through Schöneberg. So, yeah, not that great. But at the time, it was the biggest decentralized Holocaust memorial in the city, and sort of it was a step. So that's what I say. It's not the failing that's the problem. It's the not wanting to learn, not wanting to listen, not wanting to open up. So if you say, what is the task of an intellectual? To me, it's not to explain, but to have the questions, or have an openness to the questions, and kind of like, and share the questions, like kind of like, how come we have this in our streets, but we still don't mind people being killed in a genocide? Like,
yeah, I like this example also because I think the one sort of, coin that dropped over the past 3 years is that apparently memory culture in Germany is exactly not universal. It is particularist. It is something that people connect to Jews, but then pretty quickly, project onto Israel. But right now, the thing the example you tell is something that actually involves a Jewish father who doesn't even he doesn't feel placed rightly in that category at all.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of Jewish critics of German memory culture.
Of course, yeah.
I don't want to speak for them,
talk shows, but yes,
yeah,
they exist.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so, and I think it's okay. I think that is part of the memory culture. I remember once a journalist asked me whether I thought *Inglourious Bastard* was a good film, and I say, it doesn't really matter. We're really talking about it, aren't we? And I think that's what memory culture is about, that we discuss things, we correct them, and it also always has to come from below. I mean, that is what, I'm definitely not the first to say it, but what we now call memory culture, and what makes Friedrich Merz, tear up in a synagogue, was actually forced upon him over many decades by the survivors, and you know, was a work that no one appreciated.
Yeah.
No one appreciated. I mean, recently I just heard that in the 90s, no Bavarian, how you say, Ministerpräsident?
Ministry.
Yeah, had been to Dachau, which is just around the corner. In the 90s, it took Schindler's List for them to show up there, you know? It's like...
No, I think we should be very cognizant when we're talking about these issues, and just to mirror what you said earlier, that I personally as well I do feel that historical responsibility is something important in Germany, and like it's hard kind of not to get cynical about it when it's used in order to justify mass killings in Gaza and weapons sales in other places as well around the world. But I do believe that it is important that we kind of don't let them, so to speak, as in the German government, kind of take a hold of it just themselves and try to kind of reclaim it to some extent as well. Like, how can we reinvent memory culture in that moment?
I think that's where my feeling of a slight bit of failure or cowardness comes from, is something that Naomi Klein also wrote in Doppelgänger.
Who?
Naomi Klein.
Right.
This sort of, once the right wing touches it, we kind of drop it. We kind of, like, we have so much fear of being associated with them or playing into their hands that really important grievances we bypass because we don't know how to deal with the, and I think it's a mistake. And I do think, I mean, one of the examples she has is, for example, COVID, where suddenly a lot of left people were arguing for kind of a police mentality of use the app, and you know, where we could have had because all the right-wing nutters were running around kind of going, I don't care if the weak die, you know. And so our response was just like, oh my God, we have to hold together the status quo, but we don't want the status quo. We should have talked more, you know, strongly about our vision of it, but we suddenly kind of made ourselves in points, you know, complicit with the state. And that is a failure, a mistake. We should have said, no, we don't want to lock our kids up inside. We want schools outside. We want different types of teaching. We want, you know, we want to take care of our elderly differently, of the sick differently. We don't want to be complicit with the state. But and I think that is also something with memory culture. Like, you don't, and I think that is often why a lot of people don't speak about the Jewish victims of October 7th, because they're scared that they're trying to say this was as bad as this, or this kind of legitimizes that. But we cannot let them take away the care we have for people and for life, you know?
No, absolutely, 100%. I think that it is really difficult at times to kind of stay true to the principle of universal value of human life, regardless of whom, in the face of the absolutely perverse asymmetry of not just quote unquote the conflict in Israel-Palestine, but also the way in which these things are used.
Yeah, it's like almost like they touch it and it turns to stone, you know, and then like you can't animate it anymore. But I mean, and we're talking here like this, but I mean, off camera, I'd tell you some things about Trump and, you know, other people, and not so sure if I'm such an idealist about every human's life and blah, blah, blah. But so, and that's what we are as humans, you know. That's how we go through life, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned Naomi Klein. I remember that Naomi Klein writes about she writes about memory and about remembering, and even semantically that like the word remember means to reorganize, remember, like take the parts of history and like put them in a different order, which is really what you are doing in this essay. And kind of like an opposite of like this sort of static idea of like, this is memory culture, and now this means that we as Germans have to A, B, C, D, F, G.
Yeah. Now I didn't read anything, actually.
I mean,
Well,
maybe this is a good
maybe
point.
just one thing that I wanted to say about Traumaland, because it's really important for my work, is I wanted to look at history in Germany, political violence in Germany, not temporal, not time, but I tried to find places, locations where I wanted to look at it in space, because then you can see the continuities, because then things that happened over a long course of time, they suddenly fall together. And you can say, because in Germany they like to disentangle the wovenness of time and violence and the continuities and how something that happened then leads to now. And so Traumaland in a way is an experiment of looking at space to understand political violence. And so, yeah. So I always look back. I do a sort of past, present, sort of. Shall I read? Okay.
Please.
What do I read now?
Well, you read whatever you want. I personally.
You want me to read the essay, right?
No, whatever you want.
Maybe I'll just read the first few pages
This
of.
is for you if you need water. Just.
Yeah, I could also. I have on the first page of my book. I have a quote by Derek Walcott, which I thought is, and it's in English. I can read it in English, so you get a sense of what led me in this book. One of his poems. To go to Germany for the beautiful phrase unter den Linden, which like a branch in sunshine means without history under the linden trees, without the broken crucifixes of swastikas, with the swathe of summer green hillocks and red roofs, through rusted pines the village of her girlhood, of braids and chocolate. And yet there is guilt in all that green. Still, history is healing, and charity is its scar, its carapace. Carapace? Yeah. So, and then I will just read the first few pages of the prologue, which is in German. Das Blut nicht wegwischen können. Nicht tilgen können, dass es geflossen ist. Die Tat, damit auch die Schuld und den Verlust sichtbar machen, selbst wenn die Täter nie die Hand erhoben haben und die Opfer unbeachtet bleiben. An euren Händen klebt Blut. Ein Satz, der eine moralische Schuld benennt, der Gewalt zurückführen möchte auf ihren Ursprung, der hinweisen möchte auf ihr Fortbestehen. Ein Satz, der aufbegehrt, der sich nicht damit begnügt, dass vielleicht gerade noch die individuelle Schuld aufgedeckt wird, aber niemals die gesamte Verantwortung. Wenn er ausgesprochen wird, kann ich nicht weghören, kann ich nicht weitergehen. Ich laufe in der Zeit auf und ab, suche die rote Spur. Ich frage mich, was geht über die Anklage hinaus? Was kommt nach ihr? Sich Zeit zu nehmen und der Bedeutung des Verlusts nachzuspüren, immer wieder, ist Teil von Trauerarbeit. Sie widmet sich den Spuren eines einzelnen Menschen, eines individuellen Lebens und seiner Bedeutung für das eigene Leben. Sie zieht Verbindungen zwischen Erinnerungen. Das ist es, was ich mit meiner Spurensuche erreichen möchte. Vielleicht komme ich der Welt, wie sie war und ist, dadurch näher. Oder ich finde zumindest heraus, welche Fragen ich mir über uns und in dieser Welt stellen möchte. Ich gehe durch Straßen, in denen ich nach Menschen suche, die einst dort gingen. Ich will mich dabei nicht in der Abstraktion verlieren, sondern sie abgleichen mit dem konkreten Leben, das an eine konkrete Zeit und einen konkreten Ort gebunden ist. Ich erlebe ein paar kurze Momente an diesen Orten, versuche mir vorzustellen, wie diese anderen Menschen ihre Momente dort erlebten. Was bezeugten sie hier? Was zeugt noch von ihrer Präsenz? Sie bleiben Fremde, bleiben fern, möchten sich nicht einfügen in mein Erleben. Sie zeigen mir Facetten, zeigen Fragmente, uneindeutig und interpretierbar, nie ohne eine Spur meines Jetzt. Sie lassen sich nicht lösen von der Zeit, in der sie waren, von der Zeit, die mich von ihnen trennt, von der Zeit, in der ich jetzt bin. Zeiten wie ein Straßennetz, an dessen Kreuzungen ich mich überall zugleich befinden möchte. Ich suche Zeitspuren im Raum, suche Schauplätze und Tatorte, suche die Weitläufigkeit von Landschaften. Hier kann ich abweichen von den engen Wegen stringenter Erzählungen und Chronologien, in denen es stets nur vorwärts geht, in denen aus Menschen nie etwas anderes hätte werden können als TäterInnen und Opfer. Ich suche nach der Offenheit und Gleichzeitigkeit, die Vergangenheit und immer war, bevor sie zu Geschichte wurde. Die Autorität der von mir kreierten Wirklichkeit in Frage zu stellen, lässt nach den Wirklichkeiten von anderen Menschen fragen. Geschichte spielt nicht nur in der Zeit, sondern auch im Raum, schreibt der Historiker Karl Schlögl im Versuch, an die Räumlichkeit aller menschlichen Geschichte zu erinnern. Was wir uns gegenseitig erzählen, kann so oder auch anders vorgefallen sein, kann wahr oder unwahr sein, aber, ich zitiere nochmal Schlögl, es gibt keine von der sinnlichen Welt abgelöstes Reich des Geistes und damit auch keine Erzählung, die nicht auf unsere sinnliche und materielle Welt aufbauen oder einwirken würde. Alles ist lokalisierbar. Man könnte von einer topografischen Hermeneutik sprechen. So möchte ich Geschichte betrachten. Räumlich, perspektivisch, offen lesbar, nicht in Form gebracht. Ich suche sie dort, wo sie noch Ereignis war, versuche sie aus den Buchseiten zu trennen und auszubreiten wie eine Landkarte, sie aus ihrer Zeitlichkeit zu lösen. Noch ein Absatz. Ich verstehe den Zweck, es anders zu machen, die Geschichte in Stränge zu zwirbeln, manche fallen zu lassen oder zu verstecken, die anderen als haltstiftendes Seil zwischen die abzugehenden Wege zu spannen. Ohne diese Praxis gäbe es keine Verständigung darüber, was Menschen über Zeiten und Räume hinweg verbindet und trennt, wo sie sich verorten zwischen den Punkten, die passiert wurden und denen, die noch kommen. Hierbei werden nicht alle Stimmen auf gleiche Weise gehört, doch diese Praxis erlaubt zumindest zu fragen, ob es sinnvoll ist, sich als Gemeinschaft weiterhin an eben dieser Stelle festzuhalten oder doch an einer ganz anderen. Ich möchte aber keinen Sinn finden, sondern Bedeutungen auffalten. Ich möchte die Machtstränge aufdrehen, nach den fallen gelassenen Strängen suchen. Vielleicht sogar, wenn es mir gelingt, jene Menschen finden, die sie nicht halten konnten. Das Geschehene ist geschehen, selbst wenn es nicht wahrgenommen oder verstanden wurde. Es ist nicht abhängig von unserer Fähigkeit, es zu interpretieren und zu bewerten. Es kann in seiner Vollständigkeit nicht festgehalten werden, so präsent es auch weiterhin wirken mag. Präsent ist nämlich seine Wirkung und die ist wandelbar. Ich glaube, das reicht.
Dankeschön.
Danke dir.
Möchtest du noch darüber sprechen oder glaubst du, wir setzen es mit
dem
Bier fort?
Vielleicht reden wir einfach jetzt in der Gruppe.
Okay, dann würde ich sagen,
so,
1000 Dank, Asal Dardan. Ich kann nur noch von meiner Seite sagen, also dieser Essay ist explosiv und du meintest ja, du bist eine sanfte Schreiberin, wenn ich das richtig, aber es ist sanft und ich gebe dir recht, es ist sanft geschrieben.
You're doing it in German now.
Oh, I'm sorry. My brain is not that quick. Like it's the age at this point. So, since you mentioned earlier that you are a soft writer, I think that's something that comes through the way in which you use language, the way in which you physicalize language, the folding up, the narrowing, all this. But nevertheless, the essay in this specific book that I read in preparation to this event is also very sharp and very explosive and very much an FU to a certain amount of people in this country, which sometimes is necessary, I think.
Okay.
So again, thank you so much from my side for doing all this work.
Thank you for being such a lovely conversation partner.
Thank you.
Thank you.